Hi Year 9, Mr. Tapley here to walk you through our next lesson of Year 9 Humanities, looking at the Australian Constitution as part of our Civics and Citizenship unit in Term 3. So our learning intention is to develop our understanding of what is the Australian Constitution. Our success criteria is to explain what is it, when was it made, where was it made, why do we need a constitution, and then the key features of the Australian Constitution. So, before 1901, which is when Federation happened, hopefully you remember that from last lesson, before 1901 we had individual colonies. There was no Australia. We had Victoria, New South Wales. There were all these kind of little mini junior countries. And those individual colonies had individual governments and laws. So each one had their own different laws and rules. So in Victoria, the legal drinking age might be this, and then in South Australia it might be this. So different rules. Federation required a new set of national laws and rules. So before, we never really needed everyone to be on the same team, on the same page, because we were on our individual colonies. But now that we have one nation, we need one set of rules for everyone to follow. Otherwise, it's just going to be a confusing mess like it was before Federation. So, the Australian Constitution was the answer to that problem. The Australian Constitution outlines how government and laws in Australia function. It's basically the rule book of our nation. That's a good way of remembering it. Basically, it's a big book of pages that say, this is how the country works. This is how government works. This is how the courts work. Go here to this page to see what states governments can do versus federal government, etc. So this document describes the structure, the role, and the powers that govern our national political system. It's all in the Constitution. The role of the government, so what they can do, Parliament, state governments, because state governments will handle different matters to national governments. Some of our human rights, not all of them, you guys probably remember from year 8, or hopefully remember from year 8, looking at a big list of human rights that we're all entitled to. A few of those human rights are mentioned in the Constitution, like freedom of religion. And then the judicial system, which is a fancy way of saying the courts, High Court, Magistrates' Courts, basically where you go if you break the laws. All of those things are outlined in the Australian Constitution. And all of those things that I just mentioned are discussed in this little 2-minute video there, if you want to give that a quick watch. Nice there. Back up. Cool. I'm not going to show you the website, but that website there actually gives you a lot of information about the Constitution. So if you're doing textbook work, or you're looking to study about the Constitution for our assessment at the end of this unit, I recommend using that website there. That's why I've included it in the slides. So the Australian Constitution is divided into different chapters or sections, just like a book, just like a rule book. And each chapter details a different element of the Australian political system. You can see I've got little pictures for them over here. 8 chapters in total, and then those chapters are broken down into little sections. I'm not going to go through them all, because there's like 126 sections. What I will tell you is just the 8 titles or subheadings, if you will, of the Constitution. So chapter 1 talks about Parliament. So that's all the politicians, all the political representatives in Australia. So all of those blokes and blokettes, they are Parliament. So chapter 1 talks about how to get into Parliament, how many years can a Parliament member stay in power, what can Parliament members do, etc., etc. Chapter 2 talks about the government. And some people think that this word is the exact same as Parliament. It is not. So Parliament is all of the politicians. The government refers to the leading political party. So the political party in power, the winners, if you will. So right now our Prime Minister is Scott Morrison. You've probably seen him on the television during all this coronavirus or even the bushfire shenanigans that happened at the start of the year. So Scott Morrison is the leader of the Liberal Party. So the Liberal Party, his government, or his political party, are the government. The Labour Party, they're part of Parliament, they're not part of the government. So Parliament, all politicians. Government, just the guys who won the election. Chapter 3 looks at the judicial system, so the court system. So we've actually got a lot of different courts in Australia, and different courts look at different matters. Like, you're not going to go to the Supreme Court of Australia for a parking ticket. You'll probably go to the Magistrates' Court. It also looks at law and order, so what the police can do in Australia. Chapter 4 looks at finance and trade, so money, and then trading with states and trading with other countries. Chapter 5 looks at states' rights and responsibilities, because different states have different rights, and different states have different rights compared to the national government. So the national government can do certain things that the states cannot, and the states can do certain things that the national government cannot. There's a reason for that, but we'll get into that later. Chapter 6 looks at creating new states and territories. So if you guys were paying attention last lesson, when I showed you the map of Australia before Federation, there was no Northern Territory. South Australia was this big state, or big colony, that expanded across South and North. So Chapter 6 deals with creating new states like the Northern Territory or the ACT. So it talks about, all right, here's what you need to do to make a new state. Here's what those new states or territories can do. The Northern Territory and the ACT, since they are new, since they're a bit different from the other states, they actually have less rights. They have less power than places like Victoria and New South Wales, which is not really a good thing. If you're from Northern Territory or ACT, they're not very happy about it, but that's another debate for another day. Chapter 7 looks at the Governor General. So we used to be part of Britain, part of the British Empire, and when we became our own country, we actually had to ask Britain for permission. The Constitution is actually an act. It's an act of law, so it's a bill that was written up in British Parliament. So it's like parents had to give you a permission slip to go make your own country. So the British said, all right, you can have your own country, but we still want to be part of it. So we have a person in our government, in our parliament, called the Governor General, and that is the Queen's representative in Australia. So they're still kind of here. They don't do much. They just kind of sit there and they have a British accent. Don't worry about them. And then Chapter 8, the final one we'll look at, is changing the Constitution. So obviously the Constitution was made a long time ago. If there are any problems that occur, we need to change it. If there are any things that pop up that are new, we need to change it. And the process for doing that is called a referendum. So, strengths and weaknesses. So the National Constitution helped to solve a number of issues prior to Federation. So there's less inconsistency, there's less problems or conflicts between state laws. There's a clear structure for the nation. All right, we're all moving in the same direction, we're on the same team. Go team, teamwork makes the dream work. And then we've divided up the powers and responsibilities between the state and national government. You don't want to give one person or one government or one section of the government all the power. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. You give all the power to one person in the country or on a team or in a classroom, it's going to be a bad time. So that's why we divided the powers between state and national government. However, it's not all perfect sunshine rainbows. There are several weaknesses to the Australian Constitution. For example, in the United States of America, the US Constitution has a Bill of Rights. So we've got a big list of rights in America that are part of our Constitution, and they clearly outline the human rights of all American people. The Australian Constitution mentions a few, but it does not have a detailed list of human rights. So that could be considered a weakness. There are also those who believe that the national government should have more power over state governments. So some people think it's a good thing that we've divided up the powers. Some people think, well, it's actually just kind of complicated having the states do whatever they want when the national government is saying do this one thing. So you could look at the COVID-19 crisis, the coronavirus crisis, how it's been managed with different states doing different things. So the Prime Minister would like it if we were all doing the same thing, but different states, because they're responsible for their own state, can do whatever they want. So Dan Andrews, Premier of Victoria, is doing different things to Gladys, I can't pronounce her last name, the Premier of New South Wales. So consider how it would be easier to do big decisions like that with just one national government making decisions. If I want to slam dunk on my own people as well, in America, 50 states, 50 different state governments that can do whatever they want. Imagine being the president of America trying to get 50 different states to do the same thing. Difficult. So that's considered a potential weakness of the Constitution. Last slide. Right. So we know what the Constitution is, where it came from, what it is, what it talks about, some good things, some bad things. What if I want to change it though? The Constitution was created over 100 years ago, and times change. So the views and beliefs of people change. So for example, we have different opinions on race than we did 100 years ago. 100 years ago, we still had the white Australia policy. our school would look very different if we had a white Australia policy. 100 years ago, women could not vote, so our views on gender, women in the workplace have changed significantly. And then new issues are often created over time. For example, 100 years ago, they didn't have much on cybercrime. If you look at the Glen Waverley school rules or something, you find a school diary from 20, 30 years ago, there's probably not going to be a big section in the diary about cyberbullying. So to address those issues, Australia uses something called a referendum process. Referendum is a difficult to say word, but it's a fancy word for a vote. It's basically a big national vote to approve a change to the Australian Constitution. The requirements to pass a referendum are significant. The thought process behind this was, well, this is the Constitution, this is the rule book to our entire country. You shouldn't just be able to change it because you feel like it. It should be really difficult to pass one. So to pass a referendum, to make a change to the Constitution, you need a double majority. And what that means, and I've tried to show it in this little diagram over here, is you need a majority of, number one, all Australians. So you need at least half of the country to say, I think this is a good idea. And then you need a majority of all the states. So you need at least half the states to say, I think we should change this. And that's kind of shown over here in this little diagram here. So in scenario 1, you can see you've got orange and orange. You've got 2 ticks there, double majority, because the majority of all Australians have said good idea, and the majority of all the states have said good idea, at least 4 states. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states have actually agreed. In scenario 2, that referendum would not pass, because although you've got a majority of voters in at least 4 states, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 there, the majority of Australians have said no. Because you have to remember that different states have different populations. So if all of Western Australia says, yeah, we should do this, but no one in New South Wales cares, which has a much higher population, then you're not going to pass this referendum, this national vote. So you need a double majority to pass a referendum. That's what you need to remember there. So when we looked at strengths and weaknesses, what do you think this is here, a referendum? Do you think having a double majority, making it really hard to change the Constitution, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, consider how difficult it is for a group of your friends to reach any decision. And I've seen you guys in group projects just like, what should we call like our group? And it just takes forever for you to do that first step. Now think about how difficult it would be to have the entire country agree on one thing, which is why some people think a referendum, double majority, they think that's a weakness of the Australian Constitution. Not everyone, but some people do. So, I've talked for far too long. Lesson activity for what we're doing this lesson, to make up for the fact that I've talked for far too long, we're doing something a bit different, something a bit fun, hopefully. Instead of getting out your textbook, instead of answering questions in the slides, you guys are going to be creating something today. Something really simple, really simple. In our class today, you will have the opportunity to create the Glen Waverley Secondary College Constitution. Not really, but you'll be, anyway. This document should outline how GWC functions and detail the rules to our schools. So basically, in Google Classroom, I've got a little survey, a little quiz, 3 questions, and I'm just asking you questions about the different elements of a constitution. So the people, the power, and the laws, the justice system, if you will. So I'll show you where that quiz is in a moment, but basically you're going to be telling me, here's what I think GWC students should be allowed to do at school. In the Constitution of Glen Waverley, here's what students at Glen Waverley should be allowed to do. So what powers will they hold, what responsibilities will they hold, and what is your justification for this decision? So you might have a student government of school captains, or maybe the music captains get to captain in term 1 and then sports captains in term 2, I'm not sure. It's your school. The laws. What school rules will you change or maintain relating to some of the big topics at our school? The timetable, uniform, technology. I'm sure you guys have an opinion on whether you should have mobile phones at school. Facilities. Do we need better chairs? Extracurricular activities. Do we need more sports programs, more music programs, etc.? And then the justice system. So how will students voice their concerns and resolve conflicts at school? So in Australia, obviously, we have the courts, we have police. At school, how do you think we should deal with problems that show up? So if someone disagrees with school rules, what should happen? How are we going to fix that problem? How would we change the school constitution? Do you need a double majority of all the students and all the staff to agree with you? So I'll show you where that is. So all you need to do for your lesson activities today go into your classroom, and in civics and citizenship assignments, you'll see 70 learning tasks, GBC, Constitution. Open that up, bonk. And it's just those 3 questions I went over in the slides. So what student powers should exist at Glen Waverley Secondary College? So 2 or 3 ideas for what students should be able to do at school. What are they in charge of? What should they be allowed to do in your constitution? And then 1A, why? Why do you think students should be able to rock up at 10:15? Why do you think students should be able to wear whatever they want to school? Question 2, what school rules will you change and maintain? 2 or 3 ideas there, 2 or 3 recommendations. And 2A is saying, well, why will this improve our school? Question 3, how will students voice their concerns and solve conflicts at school? Question 3A, do you see any problems or concerns with your GWC Constitution? How are you going to fix those problems? So maybe you get to the end of this and you think, I've done a good job. Oh, we've actually, we don't have any teachers at our school, which I'm sure some of you see as a positive, but you'll probably have to see a few problems here and solve them in question 3A. So that's all you're doing for this lesson, guys. Bit of a fun activity. I'm not expecting you to be writing out, essay length responses. You can have a bit of fun. You can be a bit silly with this. That's why I made this different activity. And yeah, if you get some creative answers, I might show them off in the next lesson. It is anonymous, but I am curious. Last year when I did this activity, we had some pretty radical suggestions. A lot of my year 9s were like, we should get rid of middle school. We're putting students as the house leaders. I was like, okay, I can see some benefits there, but Miss Pereira's going to be pissed off. So yeah, have a bit of fun with that. Any questions, just let me know. And yeah, thanks guys. Cheers.